My wife revealed my most intimate secret to all our friends, but her next act took my life. I remember the night so vividly, perhaps too vividly. Even now, as I sit here trying to gather my thoughts, I feel that knot in my stomach tighten at the memory of my wife Amy's words. It was supposed to be a fun evening with friends, just one of our regular gatherings. There are 6 couples in our close-knit circle, and each couple takes a turn hosting everyone else for dinner, drinks, and conversation. We've known each other for years, shared birthdays, weekends away, countless inside jokes, and stories that everyone knows by heart but still laughs at. You'd think we'd be prepared for any minor slip-ups or awkward moments, but sometimes one careless remark can unravel everything in seconds. In so many ways, that Saturday night started off just as all the others had. Amy and I spent the day tidying up the living room and kitchen, double-checking that the guest bathroom was well-stocked with fresh towels, that sort of thing. She cooked a huge meal. She loves cooking for a crowd, and I usually stay out of the kitchen unless specifically needed because otherwise I just get in her way. Amy's always had this flair for hospitality. She's the kind of person who notices when someone's wine glass is getting low and makes sure they're refilled, or who sees a slight dip in the conversation and instantly asks the perfect question to get everyone talking again. I had recently received a promotion at work that brought in more money but also required a good bit of travel, up to 2 weeks a month, although each trip would only be 3 or 4 days at a time. Amy and I discussed it thoroughly before I accepted the offer, weighing the benefits of a much better salary against the downside of me not being home quite as often. It was a decision we both genuinely believed would improve our future. We could stash more money into savings, maybe fix a few things around the house, even start planning for bigger goals, like that dream vacation we talked about. Sure, the travel was a disruption, but we both decided it was worth it. That evening, we had just finished dinner, a hearty spread of roast chicken, vegetables, mashed potatoes, homemade bread, and plenty of drinks for those who wanted them. I don't drink for health reasons and personal preference, but our friends do. After dinner, we all migrated into the living room, sinking into our couches, soft chairs, and that big floor cushion that tends to become a magnet for whichever 2 or 3 people arrive last. Someone put on some mellow music in the background, but really the main event was conversation. Talk drifted between jobs, travel, the best local restaurants, random Netflix shows. Eventually, it circled around to my new promotion and the associated travel I'd be doing. Pamela, whose husband Mark also travels a lot for work, was giving Amy some pointers. She listed off the little routines she'd found helpful when Mark was away, scheduling weekly check-ins that go beyond just a random text, making sure to keep a few nights free for phone or video calls, planning something meaningful to do for herself so she wouldn't feel lonely. She even mentioned the practical matters, ensuring that small repairs around the house or bills were taken care of before Mark packed his bags, because it removed a lot of potential stress. Honestly, as I sat there listening to them, I was feeling grateful for the advice. If someone else has gone through something similar, why not learn from them? People were giggling and sipping their drinks as conversations shifted from logistical tips about traveling partners to jokes about how couples keep their intimacy alive despite the distance. That's when Heidi chimed in. Heidi's known for her quick wit. She's the friend who isn't afraid to say something outrageous just to get a reaction. And be sure to order some sex toys that are the same size as him, she joked, her words punctuated by a tipsy laugh. So you can still have sex while he's gone. Everyone chuckled at Heidi's tone. It was so lighthearted and silly, just typical Heidi humor. Nobody took it as a serious suggestion. Heidi was half laughing herself, flinging her arm out theatrically as she said it. It was the kind of offhand comment you could ignore or just laugh about for a second and move on. Except something happened, something that changed the entire tone of the evening. My wife, Amy, laughed a little, but then said, as if it were a reflex she couldn't control, "I don't think they make them that tiny." Boom. The words left her mouth, drifted through the air, and slammed right into my heart. I felt my stomach bottom out like I was on the downward drop of a roller coaster. There was an instant hush in the room, the kind of silence that's so loud it's painful. The laughter died. Nobody moved. I think someone might have coughed awkwardly, but it was all a blur. My face felt hot and simultaneously cold. Everyone stared at me, or rather, they stared at us. Amy froze too, eyes wide like she had just realized she'd crossed a line she should never have even approached. She tried to backpedal. She fumbled through half-formed apologies. Oh my God, I didn't mean it like that. I was just—" Her face was turning red, and I could see the panic set in, but it was too late. My heart pounded so hard and every part of me burned with humiliation. I had never felt so exposed. My body felt stiff, like I'd been turned to stone, as if I were locked in place by pure shock. I've never been well endowed, not even close. It's been a source of insecurity for me since I was old enough to understand that men are invariably judged by size. Or at least, that's how I had always perceived it. Our culture doesn't help. Jokes on TV and in movies, remarks in locker rooms, even on social media. Size is a punchline. It's always felt like a shameful secret I carried. My wife and I had navigated that territory privately, making do in ways that satisfied her. She'd always assured me that it never hindered her happiness or pleasure. In fact, we had a thriving sex life, or so I had thought, and a playful one at that. I liked to make sure she was satisfied in every way, even if the actual intercourse was not that lengthy or, in my worst insecurities, not as fulfilling as it might be with someone bigger. Still, it was something we had always contained within our personal world, a deeply private topic, a deeply private vulnerability. But now here it was, tossed out into the open like a comedic anecdote. People talk about wanting to vanish into thin air. I fully understood that feeling in that moment. I couldn't stay, I couldn't look at my friends, I couldn't look at my wife. I stood up, my knees were trembling, and without a single word I walked out the front door, letting it close behind me. A few of them called my name, but the further I walked, the more distant their voices sounded, until I was outside in the crisp night air. I realized I had left behind my keys, my coat, everything, but I didn't care. I needed out. I got in my car. Thankfully, I don't drink, so I was able to drive safely, and headed to a buddy's house. Not someone in our immediate friend group, but a colleague-turned-friend who was still up when I showed up on his doorstep unannounced. He looked surprised to see me, especially that late at night, but he invited me in without hesitation. He could tell something was wrong, but I just told him Amy and I had gotten into a huge argument. I couldn't bring myself to say anything else. I tried to watch TV with him, just to quiet the humiliating replay in my head. But even as the hours dragged on, even as I forced myself to fixate on random jokes from the show playing in the background, I couldn't unhear the words. I don't think they make them that tiny. The rest of that night was sleepless. I stared at the ceiling in the dim glow of a street lamp, overwhelmed by my own thoughts. A part of me acknowledged that, yes, we had joked about my size in private. Sometimes it would even turn me on when we used certain language, but that was always behind closed doors. In the sanctuary of our bedroom, I found a kind of comfort in trusting Amy with that side of letting her see my insecurities and turning them into something that brought us closer. But this was betrayal. This was exposure on a public stage, even if that stage was just our closest friends. The next day, my phone lit up with messages from Amy. At first, I ignored them. Then she started calling, but I let it go to voicemail. Her texts were variations of the same theme. I'm so sorry. Please come home. We can work this out. She apologized profusely, admitted her guilt, said she'd never meant to hurt me, that she was tipsy, it was a reflex. I still couldn't face her. The hurt was deep, and something in me kept saying over and over again, she humiliated you. She made your greatest insecurity the butt of a joke in front of everyone. Eventually, after ignoring calls and texts for a day, I searched online for somewhere to vent, to talk without revealing my true identity to people I actually knew. That's how I ended up making that post on Reddit, using a throwaway account so that none of my mutual friends with Amy would find it. Typing it all out felt cathartic in a strange way. I didn't think anyone would really respond, but I needed the catharsis of seeing my feelings spelled out in words, just to see them in black and white, away from my swirling thoughts. And the comments. I wasn't prepared for the flood of people chiming in, offering support, some telling me that leaving her was absolutely justified, others urging me to calm down and speak with her, others disclosing their own insecurities or situations. It was both overwhelming and oddly comforting that so many strangers felt compelled to weigh in. Many voices told me I wasn't an asshole for feeling humiliated, that it's natural to want to protect yourself when you feel so deeply betrayed. But they also pointed out that jumping straight to divorce might be an overreaction if there was still love and trust that could be rebuilt. It's funny how reading strangers' perspectives can bring a clarity or sense of reality check that you might not achieve in isolation. When I finally sat down to speak with Amy, it was 2 days after the party. I had stayed at my buddy's place for 2 nights, bringing him up to speed only in the vaguest sense. I told him Amy had broken my trust and I needed space. He didn't push me too hard, though I could tell he was curious. It was midday on Monday when I quietly let myself back into our house. Amy was on the couch, hunched over her phone, presumably texting me. At the sound of the door opening, she looked up, eyes filled with worry. She immediately got up, setting her phone aside, and approached me slowly like she wasn't sure I'd let her get close. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I felt my chest tighten again. The memory of her remark was still so raw, but I could also see that she was genuinely upset. Her hair was unkempt. Her eyes were puffy like she'd been crying. She took a cautious step closer, then another, until she was close enough to wrap her arms around me in a tentative hug. I am so sorry, she whispered. I was stupid and I just said something so careless. I let myself stand there for a moment, letting her arms circle me, not sure if I should hug her back or push her away. Part of me felt relieved to see the remorse on her face, while another part of me still wanted to recoil, the humiliation and anger still simmering close to the surface. We settled in the living room. It was quiet in the house. Amy apparently hadn't been sleeping well either. There were unopened grocery bags by the kitchen island and half a cup of cold coffee by the sink. We sat across from each other, me on the love seat, her on the sofa. I kept my gaze on the floor for a bit, picking at a loose thread on the cushion. I could sense her eyes on me, waiting, hoping for me to speak first. Finally, I cleared my throat. Why did you say it? I asked. my voice trembling slightly with anger and sadness. Why would you humiliate me like that? She swallowed hard. I wasn't thinking. I was tipsy. I know that doesn't excuse it. I guess Heidi's joke got me giggling and God, I just wanted to be funny. I said it without even considering the effect it would have on you. On us. As soon as it came out, I knew it was wrong. I tried to apologize right away, but you were gone before I could say more than 3 words. Do you realize how humiliating that is for me? My biggest insecurity, and you made it the butt of a joke in front of our closest friends. How am I supposed to look any of them in the eye? Do you know what's going through my head every time I imagine going to one of their houses or see their faces again? She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I do realize, she said softly. I replayed it in my head 1,000 times since Saturday. I hate myself for it. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to voice the fear I'd been clinging to. I feel like I can't trust you with that part of. I feel like everything we do in private is at risk of being a joke among our friends. Amy's hand covered her mouth as she tried to stifle sobs. No, she managed. I would never do that again. I swear it was a terrible, terrible slip-up. It's not how I really feel. You know I love everything we do together. She reached for my hand, but I hesitated before letting her hold. I looked down at our intertwined fingers. I could feel her trembling. It reminded me of how, in the early days, she'd get shy about holding hands in front of people, even though she was a super affectionate person at home. Seeing her so broken made me realize she was hurting too. That said, my anger still lingered. I felt it flicker through me when I recalled the hush that fell over the room and the looks on everyone's faces. We spent hours talking that afternoon. She recounted in detail her memories of that night, how she'd had 1 too many glasses of wine, how she was already feeling a little nervous about my upcoming travel, not wanting me to leave. She admitted she sometimes uses humor, unfortunate humor, as a defense mechanism. She explained that when Heidi made that quip, she tried to respond in kind, not thinking about how personal it would become once referencing my size. I told her everything I'd been feeling, the sense of betrayal, the shame of having everyone know something so private, the worry that I'd never be able to sit in a room with them again without imagining them looking at me differently, pitying. We circled around the topic of how we sometimes used size play or belittling talk in the bedroom. Amy pointed out that maybe she'd conflated that with acceptable humor in that moment because of the alcohol, or because we'd always had that dynamic where joking about it privately was okay. That was a crucial point because in the comments on Reddit, several people had suggested that if I'd ever shown her it was okay to talk about my size that way, even in a private, playful context, she might have just let it slip out in a moment of poor judgment. I told her that I understood the distinction, but that it absolutely didn't excuse humiliating me in front of our friends. She didn't try to defend herself. She didn't say, "Oh, you can't blame me. You like it sometimes." Instead, she simply said, "I understand, and I'm sorry. I betrayed that boundary in the worst possible way." That night, we didn't so much reconcile as we decided not to physically separate. I considered moving out to a friend's place for a while, but something in me told me that would prolong the distance between us. We slept in separate rooms. She tried to come into the bed with me at first, but I needed space. I needed to process my hurt. She cried softly behind the closed door of our guest, and I lay awake in our bed, too angry and sad to fall asleep. The next day, she made coffee and left a note that said, "I know we have so much to work. I'm here, ready whenever you are." It felt genuine. Even so, I left the house for a walk without drinking the coffee. My head was still a mess. When I got back, she was gone to run some errands, and I finally sat on our porch steps, reading through more comments from that Reddit post. So many people weighed in with their stories of betrayal, how they resolved them, or how they ended them. A lot of them insisted that this didn't have to be marriage ending if we could work through it sincerely. Others were absolutely sure that this was the ultimate breach of trust and insisted leaving was the best option. But for me, the question wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the aftermath of shame. Could I stand to face our friends again, especially the ones who had actually witnessed the comment? It's important to understand that I've struggled with my self-esteem for as long as I can remember. Even as a teenager, before I'd ever had a serious girlfriend, I worried I wouldn't measure up. Literally. The first time I became intimate with someone, my anxiety overshadowed the entire experience. So when I finally met Amy, and we developed this closeness that included acceptance of my body exactly how it was, it felt incredibly freeing. Over the years, we made jokes about it privately. I actually liked that she could be playful with something that had caused me so much shame. It felt almost liberating, as though I no longer had to hide that insecurity in the shadows. But that night, she shattered that safe bubble we'd created, and it was as though I was an insecure teenager all over again, grappling with the fear of being ridiculed. After another day of swirling thoughts, I decided we needed a serious, structured conversation, something calmer than our emotional talk the previous day. We were both exhausted, and we needed to get to the roots of things. So, that Wednesday, we turned off our phones, put them in another room so we wouldn't be distracted, and sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea. I told her I wanted to try to systematically address every angle: how I felt, how she felt, the potential solutions, the impact on our friendships, and the question of counseling. She nodded, eyes shining with quiet determination. I'm ready, she said, no matter how long it takes. I began with how I felt. I'm still deeply humiliated. That's not going away overnight. Every time I think about seeing Heidi or Pamela or any of them, I get this knot in my stomach. Amy quietly listened as I spoke, not interrupting. I went on to explain the fear that our friend group would look at me differently, maybe pity me, or see me as less of a man. I admitted that while rationally, I knew they probably had their own insecurities and might not judge me as harshly as I imagined. The emotional side of me wasn't ready to believe that yet. Amy reached across the table, resting her hand on top of mine. I can't change what I said. All I can do is try to fix how I handle things going forward. I love you. This is the last thing I ever wanted. I swallowed back tears. I know you love me. It's just words don't disappear once they're said. And I'm worried that you've opened a door. A Pandora's box that can't be closed. Her voice trembled. I promise you, they're not going to make fun of you. If anything, they might feel sorry for me for being so careless. This comment made me flint. I told her that pity wasn't exactly what I was going for. She quickly clarified that she just meant they might see her as the bad guy. Not me, as the punchline. They love you, she insisted. I'm the one who betrayed your trust. I took a long sip of my tea, breathing in the steam. We have to figure out if we can come back from this. Because I was seriously thinking about leaving. She choked back tears. I know, and if you do, I'll understand. Do you want me to leave? I asked quietly, afraid of her answer. She shook her head immediately. Number, I want you to stay, and I want us to heal. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever you need. I already told you. I'll give up drinking altogether if that helps you feel safe. I was surprised to hear her mention giving up alcohol. I hadn't realized she'd recognized on her own that her drinking might have become a bit too frequent in recent months. I'm not demonizing alcohol, but for us, the dynamic was complicated by the fact that I don't drink at all. Would you really do that? I asked. Yes, she said, unwavering, if that helps. Because obviously, if this is what I do when I'm not thinking straight, I need to change something. We talked for a while longer. We decided we'd each do individual counseling. Me to work on my insecurity and the betrayal, her to work on her tendencies to deflect with humor and to reevaluate her relationship with alcohol. And eventually, we'd do couples therapy to address this breach of trust and whatever else might surface. It was a plan, a roadmap forward. I'm also worried about the traveling, I admitted. Maybe that's magnifying all my insecurities. I won't be here. You'll be alone. What if you start thinking about how small I am and it fosters resentment or curiosity about someone else who isn't? I know that sounds paranoid. Amy grabbed both my hands, looking me squarely in the eye. I love you, she said. Always have, always will. That's not lip service. Yes, you're not huge, but you've made me happy beyond measure, and I am truly sorry for betraying. I have never felt like I was missing something physically in our marriage. You're more than enough. I felt my eyes sting with tears again, partly from relief and partly from the lingering hurt that her words brought up. I wanted to believe her, but trust takes time to rebuild. We left it at that for the evening, just hugging for a long time, arms wrapped around each other. It was the first real embrace we'd shared since that horrible night. I felt the tension in my body slowly unwind, at least a little, as I rested my chin on her shoulder. The next few days were like walking on eggshells. Amy followed through with her vow to not drink. She sipped water, juice, or tea all day long. She was uncharacteristically subdued. I could see the weight of her guilt. Several times she asked, "Are you okay?" Or, "Do you want me to leave you alone?" She was giving me the space to process as I saw fit. But it also created this slightly stilted atmosphere in the house. We were both recovering from an emotional quake, not sure if the aftershocks would come. I decided to call each friend from our group, one by one. Amy offered to do it for me, to apologize on my behalf, but I told her I wanted to address it. I wasn't looking to air my grievances or demand an apology from them. They weren't to blame, except Heidi had made the initial joke, but her joke was nowhere near as personal as what Amy had done. Still, I felt I should address the elephant in the room so that if or when we all got together again, we wouldn't all be drowning in awkward silence. I started with Mark, Pamela's husband, because out of everyone, I felt he might understand. He travels for work too, and though we weren't super close, we'd bonded a few times over the stress of living out of suitcases. On the phone, Mark was straightforward. "Look, man, I'm really sorry that happened." Amy apologized to us too. She felt terrible. We all felt terrible, actually. No one wanted to embarrass you. Heidi was just messing around, and it obviously went too far when Amy said what she said. He added, "We're your friends. This doesn't change how we see you. I don't care about your size or who's big, who's not. None of that. We all have insecurities. Anyone who tries to judge you is a jerk. We're not jerks. And to be honest, none of us are thinking about it in detail." It was more about the shock that she said it, not about the actual content of what she said, if that makes sense. His words were comforting. I thanked him, still feeling weird about it, but hearing Mark express that they don't see me in a lesser light eased some of the tension. I had a similar conversation with the others, although I didn't get Heidi on the phone because she was out of town. She eventually left me a heartfelt voicemail, apologizing for instigating the chain of events, reminding me that she was just trying to make a harmless joke. She never expected it to turn so personal, and definitely never meant to hurt me. I could sense her sincerity. In the meantime, Amy and I started to research therapists. We found one near our area for individual counseling and a separate one for couples counseling. We scheduled an appointment for Amy first. She felt it was urgent to address her relationship with alcohol, especially if it meant she was capable of hurting me in such a careless way. My appointment was set for the following week. We decided we wouldn't start couples therapy until we each had at least a few individual sessions, just to get our own footing. Life continued in this fragile but functional pattern. We both went to work. We shared the same bed again, though there was less intimacy than before, still overshadowed by the emotional tension, and we kept a low profile socially. For a couple of weeks, we didn't accept any invitations from our friend group, not even the ones inviting us to casual get-togethers. Amy spent hours reading books about communication and self-improvement. I read articles and watched videos about overcoming insecurities. It felt like we were each making genuine effort, but it would still be a long road to feeling safe in our relationship again. In my mind, the question was always there. Could we ever return to that comfortable synergy we had, where we could joke privately about anything, trusting each other fully? Or was that bubble forever burst? The first therapy session was eye-opening. I sat down with a therapist named Dr. McLean, who specialized in men's issues around self-esteem, body image, and relationship stress. We talked about the root of my insecurities, how they went back to my early teen years. He explained that while size jokes in the media are common, we as men rarely talk about how deeply they can wound us, how they can build up shame. I even told him about how Amy and I had made it playful in private, and he asked me to dig deeper into why that turned me on. I realized I found a certain empowerment in controlling the narrative of my own insecurity. If I was the one turning it into a playful scenario, it felt less like a weapon and more like an intimate secret. Dr. McLean told me that's not unusual, but it can still be risky if we don't set firm boundaries around it in real life. We also touched on why the betrayal felt so severe. It basically yanked away the sense of safety I had with Amy in regard to my biggest vulnerability. Amy, for her part, was seeing her own counselor. She later told me she spent much of the sessions dissecting how she came to rely on humor and alcohol in stressful or awkward social situations. She had never identified as having a serious drinking problem, but the more she learned, the more she realized that every time she was anxious or wanted to avoid feeling something, she poured a glass of wine or made a self-deprecating joke or teased someone. This was the first time it had backfired so horribly, but she recognized that it was a pattern that needed addressing. Over the next few weeks, we tiptoed towards something resembling healing. We had a few tough conversations, mostly late at night when the weight of the day was behind us, and we could be raw and open. She would ask me how I was feeling about our sexual relationship going forward. Initially, I was so guarded. "I don't know," I'd say. "I feel reluctant to be that vulnerable with you." She'd nod, tears welling up because she knew that was the natural consequence of what had happened. There was no quick fix for that. Trust doesn't snap back into place like a rubber band. Some nights, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting to the notion of divorce again. It seemed so final, so absolute, yet I couldn't deny that the thought was still in the back of my mind. We'd been married for several years, built a life together, supported each other through tough times. I couldn't imagine just walking away, but the pain of public humiliation was acute. We delayed seeing our group of friends for almost a month. During that time, we exchanged texts with them, kept things polite and minimal. Amy told them she was focusing on some personal matters and hoped they understood. They did, for the most part, although I'm sure they had their own curiosities about what was going on behind closed doors. Eventually, though, we couldn't isolate ourselves forever. All of them had grown concerned, especially since our friend group was used to seeing each other multiple times a month. It was Mark and Pamela who proposed a smaller-scale get-together to ease us back into socializing. Just them and us. They invited us over for a simple dinner. I agonized over the invitation for a day or two, unsure if I could handle even that. But Dr. McLean advised me that part of healing is testing the waters when we think we're ready. "You can't hide forever," he said gently. "That might build the fear up even more." So, on a Sunday afternoon, Amy and I got in the car and drove to Mark and Pamela's place. My nerves were taut. I kept imagining walking in, seeing them stare at me, conjuring up images of them smirking about my size. Amy seemed just as tense as I was, fiddling with the hem of her shirt, letting out shaky breaths. When we arrived, they greeted us kindly, hugging us both. There was warmth in their smiles, no sign of judgment or awkwardness. We made small talk about Mark's latest business trip, about Pamela's attempt at a new lasagna recipe. I noticed that neither of them brought out wine, even though they used to. Pamela quietly explained, "We decided to keep it alcohol-free tonight. You know, just to keep things relaxed." Amy shot me a relieved glance, and I felt a spark of gratitude for their consideration. We sat at the table and conversation flowed more easily than I expected. The dreaded incident wasn't mentioned once, though at one point Mark gave me a discreet nod, almost a silent way of saying, "I know, it's all good," and somehow that was enough to reassure me that they didn't see me any differently. As the weeks turned into a couple of months, we repeated this process with the other couples in our friend group, usually in smaller gatherings, not the full group at once. Each time, it got a little easier. With each successful night, my panic subsided a bit more. People were normal with me. They teased each other about mundane things, recounted dumb stories from work, asked about my upcoming trips. Not once did I catch anyone's side-eye or making awkward allusions to that. If anything, the only difference was a subtle gentleness, especially in how they dealt with me, as if they were reminding me with their tone and body language that they supported me, that they cared. Back at home, Amy and I started couples therapy. Our counselor, Dr. Shaw, was calm and direct. She asked open-ended questions that led us to confront the deeper issues: my lifelong insecurity, Amy's fear of abandonment, which she revealed was part of the reason she panicked about me traveling, and our communication failed. We both admitted that we had been brushing certain anxieties under the rug for a while. Me, my worry that Amy secretly wanted someone physically larger. Amy, her worry that I'd find traveling gave me a sense of freedom that might make me drift away from her. It felt good to get all that on the table, even though it was uncomfortable, even though it made us tear up again. It was real, and real was what we needed. The turning point for me came in the third or fourth couple session, when Dr. Shaw asked me to articulate what I needed from Amy to feel safe again. I said, "I need to know that she respects my vulnerability, that she won't use it against me." Amy looked me straight in the eye, tears forming again, and said, "I pledge to you, I will never make a joke like that again. I promise I will never betray your trust that way, even if we disagree or if we're in public. I'm done with that kind of humor." It was as if a weight lifted from my shoulder. She'd said as much before, but somehow, having it out in front of a counselor in a focused setting gave it more substance, more solemnity. We kept working at our intimacy. We had nights where we approached each other gently, almost shyly, rediscovering that closeness in the bedroom. I was still anxious initially, wondering if the humiliating incident might replay in my head, overshadowing the moment. But as time passed, I let myself sink into her warmth, remembering how we had always fit together. She expressed to me over and over that size wasn't her priority, that she found our intimate life fulfilling, that the emotional bond mattered more than anything. She said, half laughing, half crying at one point, "If the world ended and I could pick any man to be with, I'd pick you. Every time." It seemed theatrical, but I knew it was her way of telling me she wasn't missing anything. Slowly but surely, we found ourselves laughing more. I even cracked a small joke about traveling, referencing something Heidi had said about the silly sex toy recommendation, but in a gentle, less pointed. Amy froze at first, worried that I was upset, but when she realized I was genuinely teasing in a self-deprecating manner again, on my own terms, she exhaled, relieved that maybe, just maybe, the wound was healed. We'd never erase that night, but we could move past it together. The next time we gathered with the entire group, including Heidi, I could feel a pulse of nerves as soon as we parked outside the host's house. I didn't know how Heidi would act. I hadn't seen her since the night she made that initial quip. When we walked in, the usual wave of greetings washed over us. Heidi was in the living room, holding a glass of sparkling cider, non-alcoholic, I presume. Her gaze met mine, and she approached with caution. She murmured a soft apology, hugging me briefly. I could tell she genuinely felt bad, though her role in everything was minor compared to Amy's. Nonetheless, it was good to close that. The rest of the evening actually felt normal. People told jokes, bantered, teased each other about sports teams or incompetent bosses. At one point, Heidi said something about size in reference to a pizza slice, then immediately clamped her hand over her mouth, worried she'd crossed a line. The room burst out laughing, more out of relief than anything else, and I even joined in. That moment symbolized that we weren't walking on eggshells anymore. We could enjoy each other's company again. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something steadier. My travel schedule kicked in, and I made a point to call or video chat with Amy each evening, sometimes multiple times a day if we could swing it. We shared quick updates about everything from the weather in the city I was visiting, to what she was cooking at home, to the silly jokes I'd overhear at the office. As for sex, she didn't need to replace me with a toy that matched my size. She laughed at the notion as she told me, "I'm not into that." And though the conversation was still tinged with awkwardness, we found a sweet spot in simply focusing on reconnecting emotion. We'd even do playful phone sex or send each other texts to spark that closeness. It was a far cry from the deep sense of shame I felt that Saturday night. We were forging a new path, with the knowledge that we had to protect each other's vulnerabilities more vigilantly. Eventually, Amy and I arrived at a place of forgiveness. Her forgiving herself, me forgiving. The humiliating memory might always flicker in the back of my mind if I dwell on it too long, but it no longer dominates my every thought. We returned to therapy a few more times together, and then decided to go once a month just to keep ourselves on track. We each still do individual sessions every now and then. She's reading more about balancing her social drinking, but for the most part, she's chosen to stay away from alcohol completely for a while, focusing on discovering new ways to manage stress or social anxiety. One evening, a few months after the incident, we found ourselves cuddled on the couch, scrolling through pictures of us from years ago. There were snapshots from our wedding day, from trips we'd taken, from parties with friends. I felt a wave of nostalgia. "We've been through so much," I whispered. She turned to me, eyes glistening with emotion, and said, "And we'll keep going through more because that's what life is. But I promise, I'll never betray your trust like that again." I believed. The look in her eyes spoke of sincerity and lessons learned. So we kept building back, piece by piece. I won't lie and say everything is perfect. Insecurities don't vanish. Trust once broken doesn't instantly reappear. But I've learned a few important truths through this ordeal. One is that loving someone isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how you show up to fix things when you do make them. Another is that we sometimes underestimate the compassion of our friends. I had been convinced they'd see me as the tiny guy from now on. But real friends don't define you by a single joke or insecurity. They understand that we're all human, we all have flaws, and we're all just trying to navigate life without too many bruises. When I first posted on Reddit, I was in that raw, wounded state, feeling like my marriage might be over. Looking back on that time, I can't blame myself for how I felt. Hurt can be blinding. But I'm glad I had the chance to gain perspective, to talk to Amy, to hear her remorse, to see her efforts to correct this. I'm glad we had the mutual courage to embark on therapy. And yes, the meltdown forced us to confront underlying issues in our marriage. Issues that might have quietly festered if we hadn't had this explosive event. That doesn't mean I'm glad it happened. I'd give anything to erase that humiliation. But I do see that it catalyzed necessary change. So here we stand, or sit, or lie, depending on the day. Amy and I share the same bed. We talk openly about my upcoming travels, and we're even planning a big vacation with some of the extra money from my raise. We've taken the time to truly plan out how we'll handle my absences. Scheduled calls, ways for each of us to feel connected even if we're physically apart. And in the bedroom, the dynamic is returning to that playful, intimate synergy, minus any references that might cross lines. We learned the hard way that some jokes should never leave the bedroom door. And even within that space, we need an ironclad agreement on boundaries. She's reaffirmed to me countless times that she's satisfied, that our love life is enough, that I am enough. A few evenings ago, we were in the middle of an unremarkable dinner, just leftovers and a simple salad, when she reached across the table to hold my hand. I saw in her eyes the tenderness that used to be effortless before all this. She said, "I'm proud of us." And I realized that I too felt that pride. We'd been tested, we'd stumbled, we'd done real damage, but we chose to pick each other up, to continue the journey as a couple. I can't speak for everyone in a similar situation, nor can I promise that this is how it always goes. Sometimes, a betrayal of trust leads to an irreversible fracture. But for us, we found a path forward. We haven't just patched over the cracks. We're strengthening the foundation. And though the memory of that night still flutters in my mind from time to time, reminding me of my most vulnerable moment, I refuse to let it define us. Months later, we're settling into the new routine. My travel schedule is consistent. My job is exciting and fulfilling. I find that I appreciate my time at home even more. We both do. We make an effort to do special little things for each other. An unexpected love note, a small gift that shows how well we know each other, a weekend getaway when we can swing it. We laugh again, deeply, not forced or guarded. We've learned that a single careless remark can sting like 1,000 bees if it exposes a raw. But we've also learned that the power of a heartfelt apology, backed by tangible, consistent change, can salve even the deepest wounds. So that's our story. The real resolution isn't a neat, tidy bow that says, "All is forgiven, life is perfect." It's more like a careful weaving of new threads to repair a tear in the fabric of our relationship. We keep weaving, day by day, and though the repair might be noticeable if you look closely, the cloth is still intact and maybe even stronger than before. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still cringe at the memory of that night, but the sting is duller, diluted by time, and overshadowed by the love we continue to share. If anything, it taught me that I have to trust my partner to protect what I hold, but I also have to communicate my boundaries fiercely, clearly, and she has to respect them. I never want to feel that level of humiliation again. I never want to see that stricken look on her face again, knowing she wounded me so profound, and she never wants to be the source of that wound again either. That mutual desire to protect each other, that's what drives our marriage forward. This is our life as it stands, mindful, imperfect, and undeniably ours. And despite the turmoil, despite the heartbreak, I can say it with cautious optimism. We're going to be okay.